Hey, before we go any further, let me quickly reintroduce myself because I know some people may be jumping into this series right here and only watching this one video. My name is Michael Neely, and I've been in the online business and digital marketing world for well over 15 years. I'm a seven-figure entrepreneur, an international best-selling author, and I've worked with thousands of coaches, consultants, speakers, authors, and creators of all types who are trying to turn what they know into a real sustainable business. Not just a hustle, not just a side project, but something that actually lasts. Over the last decade, I've watched people with incredible talent struggle for years. And I've watched people with average skill sets build extraordinary businesses. And as I paid attention, I started to notice a very clear pattern. Before we dive in though, one important note. If you haven't watched the first video in this series yet, I strongly encourage you to pause this one and go watch that first video. Everything we're talking about here builds directly on what we covered there, and this video will land much more deeply once you've seen how lead flow is the hidden bottleneck sabotaging even smart entrepreneurs. And if you have watched it, well then this video is the natural next step. Because once you see the bottleneck, the next question becomes unavoidable. What actually changes when that bottleneck is removed? Not on paper, not in theory, but in your lived day-to-day experience of running a business. And here's the belief I want you to walk away with by the end of this video. As long as you know how to create a steady flow of leads, you have infinite chances to get everything else right. Infinite chances. Not a few chances, not one big shot, not a make or break moment, infinite chances. And that single idea changes how business feels. Because most businesses don't fail because the owner isn't smart. They don't fail because the owner lacks talent. They don't fail because the owner doesn't care. They don't even fail because the idea was bad. They fail because pressure builds faster than learning. And pressure almost always comes from scarcity. Scarcity of leads, scarcity of opportunities, scarcity of margin for error, scarcity of time to figure things out. When opportunity is scarce, everything feels heavier than it should. Every post feels important. Every email feels loaded. Every launch feels like it has to work. Every decision feels permanent. And that pressure doesn't just affect revenue. It affects how clearly you think. It affects how willing you are to take risks. It affects your confidence. It affects how creative you're willing to be. You don't experiment when you're under pressure. You don't test things boldly when you're under pressure. You don't play a long game when you're under pressure. You play defense. You play not to lose. And that is not how great businesses are built. There is something I learned very early on in my online career from Jeff Walker, and it's foundational to how I think about business. Jeff says there are only two rules of business. Rule number one, only sell stuff the market really wants. And rule number two, always be building your list. Those are the rules. They're simple, they're clear, they're not complicated. And most people agree with them. Most people will nod when they hear them. Most people even write them down and highlight them. But agreeing with those rules and actually living those rules are two very different things. So, for years, I knew those rules. I understood them intellectually. I could explain them. I could quote them back to you. I could teach them. I actually do teach them. But they hadn't fully landed yet. And until they do, business still feels stressful. All right, I'm going to show you why. I want you to imagine two sales reps. We have sales rep A and sales rep B. On day one, sales rep A is 10 times better at sales than sales rep B. They're better on calls, better at handling objections, better at closing deals. They're more confident, more polished. Sales rep B is average, nothing special. They stumble over words, maybe they miss cues, they don't always say the right thing. But there's one difference that changes everything. Sales rep B is 8 times better at getting leads. More conversations, more at-bats, more chances, more people entering their world. Now at first, sales rep A looks like the obvious winner. More deals, more confidence, more validation, more short-term success. Sales rep B may struggle early on. They miss deals. They feel awkward. They second-guess themselves. They wonder if they're cut out for this. But sales rep B is talking to more people every single day. They're hearing more objections again and again. They're noticing patterns. They're seeing what resonates and what doesn't. They're learning how people actually decide, and they start adjusting how they speak. They start understanding timing. They start noticing when people lean in and when they pull back. And slowly, something changes. Not overnight, not dramatically, but steadily. Sales rep B gets better. Sales rep A stays excellent, but capped. Sales rep B keeps improving, and over time, the gap closes. Then it reverses. Sales rep B wins. Not because they were better on day one. Not because they were more talented. Not because they were smarter. But because opportunity compounded skill. This is how business actually works. Skill does not compound in isolation. Skill compounds when opportunity is abundant. And opportunity comes from lead flow. When leads are inconsistent, learning slows down. You don't get enough feedback. You don't get enough reps. You don't get enough chances to improve. When leads are steady, learning accelerates. You see patterns faster. You adjust more confidently. You build momentum. You start trusting yourself. And this is why steady lead flow changes everything. When leads are inconsistent, pressure creeps into every decision. You hesitate to test new ideas. You hesitate to change your messaging. You hesitate to raise your prices. You hesitate to narrow your focus. You hesitate to make bold moves because you're afraid of breaking something that already feels unstable. But when leads are steady, something shifts. You gain patience. You can test things without panic. You can miss without spiraling. You can improve without fear. You can make decisions from clarity instead of desperation. And when that happens, you stay in the game longer. And staying in the game is how real businesses are built. All right, this is where I want to share something personal, and I'll keep it simple. For a long time, my business technically worked, but it always felt tight, unstable, I guess. I had offers, I had results, I had testimonials, I even had proof. But everything required effort just to keep things going. There was always this low-level kind of hum of pressure. I was constantly checking Stripe, constantly logging into PayPal, watching transfers, waiting for deposits to clear. And not because anything was wrong, but because the system didn't feel predictable, settled. It felt like I had to keep my eye on it all the time. And then something changed. Not because I worked harder, not because I became more disciplined, not because I suddenly figured everything out, I didn't, but because lead flow stabilized. Over time, things got smooth enough that I stopped checking Stripe altogether. Transfers became automatic, predictable, boring in the best way. I log into PayPal maybe once a week now, sometimes less. That's not about money, that's about pressure disappearing. Because when pressure disappears, your nervous system can settle. And when your nervous system settles, your thinking improves. When your thinking improves, your decisions get cleaner. And that's what most people don't realize. Lead flow doesn't just change revenue. It changes how your body experiences business. When my list crossed around 10,000 subscribers, my business changed. Not overnight, not magically, Not because I suddenly became a different person, but fundamentally, foundationally. The best way I can describe it is like learning to ride a bike. You can explain to someone, you can explain leaning into a turn, you can explain balance, you can explain the mechanics perfectly. But until your body actually feels balance, you don't really know it. But that moment, I knew list building mattered. After that moment, I felt it. Decisions felt calmer. Fear dropped. Confidence increased. Patience expanded. Not because I suddenly became smarter, not because I suddenly became more motivated, but because pressure eased. I knew that if something didn't work, it wasn't the end. There would be another launch, another offer, another chance to adjust and improve. That's what lead flow gives you. It gives you time, and time changes everything. Urgency is what breaks most businesses. Urgency leads to bad decisions. Urgency leads to burnout. Urgency leads to shortcuts. It leads to over-attachment to outcome. When everything feels urgent, creativity shrinks. You stop thinking expansively. You stop seeing options. You stop trusting yourself. But when lead flow is steady, urgency dissolves. And when urgency dissolves, learning accelerates. This is why so many entrepreneurs live in feast or famine cycles. They're always swinging hard because they feel like they have to. They don't have room for patience. They don't have room for mistakes. They don't have room to breathe. And patience is what allows skill to mature. So let's come back to Jeff's rules again. Okay, as I mentioned, Jeff has 2 rules of business. Rule number 1, only sell stuff the market really wants. You don't figure that out in isolation, by the way. You figure it out through feedback, through conversations, through volume. Rule number 2, always be building your list. Because without a list, you don't get enough repetitions to truly learn rule number 1. And this is also where people get confused about free leads. A follower is not a lead. Visibility without access is not leverage. If you don't have someone's name and a way to reach them directly at scale, you do not have a lead. Even when leads come from podcasts, summits, or stages, you are still paying for them. You're paying with time, with energy, with opportunity cost. The difference is not whether you pay, the difference is whether the flow is predictable. The winners are not the people who avoid paying for leads. The winners are the people who understand their numbers. They know what a lead is worth. They know what they can afford to pay. They know how to keep the flow steady. They know how to stay in the game long enough to get really good. That's when growth becomes predictable. That's when businesses stop feeling fragile. This is the real shift. Not hustling harder, not grinding more, not becoming someone else. The shift from scarcity-driven pressure to opportunity-driven patience. Because when leads are flowing, something profound happens. You stop attaching your worth to every result. You stop overthinking every post. You stop feeling like one bad month could undo everything. You start thinking long term. You start making clear decisions. You start trusting the process. You start building with confidence. And the long-term view is where real businesses are built. So take a moment to download and fill out the simple math behind your list, which you can find below this video. It's an easy little story form that I've provided for you. And if you've already done it, that's even better. And I want you to reflect on a few things as you review your numbers. Where has pressure been running your business? Where have you felt like things only work when you're pushing? Where have you avoided testing ideas because you couldn't afford for them not to work? And that's not a personal flaw, by the way. That's not a motivation issue. That's not a discipline issue. That's a system problem. And systems can be changed. In the next video, we're going to talk about what it actually looks like to build a predictable lead flow, not with hacks, not with hope, but with structure. Because once this shift clicks, and once the pressure lifts, everything else finally has room to work. All right, I'll see you in the next video.